Dreams in fiction often hold great importance. They can present deep insights into a character's past and internal workings, and they can often act as reflections on the present from perspectives unique from those the viewer has previously received. I've always regarded the lack of dreams in HBO's Game of Thrones as a weakness of the show as compared to its book counterpart early on. Such things are quite difficult to translate to the screen, but they can have great payoff if such a translation is done properly. One of the things I love about my favorite show of all time, The Sopranos, is how it handles dream sequences in a great way. That all said, today we'll be taking a look at two dreams within the A Song of Ice and Fire book series. Both of these dreams come from A Feast for Crows and pertain to one of my favorite point of view characters. And both of them seem to have enormous implications for the future of the story as a whole. So today, let's examine a pair of Jaime Lannister's prophetic dreams. Jaime isn't a character who's typically associated with magic in the texts. He grounds himself in reality and fixates only on the things directly in his surroundings, often intentionally blocking out the larger meaning of life in order to preserve his sense of self. That sense of self and carefully manicured reality come crashing down early in A Storm of Swords, and Jaime's worldview shifts drastically over the three books in which the viewer is exposed to his perspective as a viewpoint character. During the fourth and best book, Jaime spends a good amount of his time dealing with the aftermath of the War of the Five Kings in the Riverlands. These chapters see Jaime developing as a leader and as an individual, and coming to grips with his own legacy, that of his father, and the many vows that he's made over his life. All that's to say that this is the first time Jamie's new identity is really self actualizing. And through doing so, he seems to come into contact with two distinct forms of both internal dream self knowledge and magical knowledge of some sort or another in these two visions that have been discussed earlier. Both of these dreams that I've mentioned raise red flags as to their potentially magical nature. In the case of the first instance, chronologically, Jamie falls asleep while his head is resting on the stump of a weirwood. Throughout the book series, the reader sees the mystical potential in these trees, particularly through Bran's chapters Late in Dance. They seem to be a magical network of some sort, and by sleeping pretty much plugged into it, Jamie's dreams may be influenced, whether intentionally or unintentionally, by this magical collective consciousness that has existed across Westeros for what seems to be thousands of years. It seems as though these visions might be kind of influenced by a larger magical sphere rather than sent by any one individual. The first dream is a lot. Jamie wakes up and immediately identifies three things. He's home again at Casterly Rock, he's naked, and he's once again in possession of his sword hand. He is forced to march down, further into the rock, by a number of figures armed with spears and wearing these dark helmets. He's confronted with darkness beneath the castle and is told that it is his place by his father and by his sister. Brienne then appears, chained and speaking to Jamie. One passage specifically states that a sword, she begged. Suddenly, the pair of them have flaming swords, casting away some of the darkness. He notes that she is warm before observing two riders on pale horses approaching. More soon appear, and Jaime is confronted by the brothers with whom he had served Aerys II as a Kingsguard. These brothers confront him about his oath breaking, causing his sword to dim, and eventually creating such a panic in Sir Jaime to cause him to wake from his slumber. Like I said, that dream is a lot. In an initial draft of this video, I was going to read the whole thing, but it took far too long, and I didn't want to just drone on and on about it. And if you want to read this further, you can absolutely take a look at the chapter itself in A Feast for Crows, as it's the best book, and it's, in my mind, the best one to reread. Let's unpack some of the important parts here. Casterly Rock is our setting for this dream, and it's an important one for Jamie. In both the dream and reality, Tywin states that it's Jamie's place, showing that Jamie seems to have internalized this desire from his father to become Lord of the Rock, as Tywin repeatedly urged Jaime to cast away his vows to the Kingsguard and take what Tywin believed to be his proper seat at Casterly Rock, probably mostly to prevent Tyrion from doing so. What's more, some of the other figures in Casterly Rock seem quite interesting. Namely, the men with helmets and spears escorting Jaime deep into Casterly Rock, seemingly as a prisoner. To me, the main force that sounds similar to this is the Unsullied. Perhaps Daenerys could order this army to seize the rock in an upcoming conflict. Such a thing happens in HBO's Game of Thrones, but it's very anticlimactic and doesn't really have any build-up. This could be an indication that something similar but different happens in the book, namely because Jaime seems to be present for it. One specific part of this dream that really lends itself to the idea that Jaime has tapped into some sort of prophetic magic is Brienne asking for a sword. This runs directly parallel to Brienne's final chapter in Feast, in which she's forced to make an impossible choice by Lady Stoneheart. Either she can choose the noose and be hanged alongside her companions, or she can choose the sword and hunt down Jaime Lannister, bringing him to the vengeful spirit that is now Catelyn Stark. Brienne initially changes the noose, but as she's hanging, she shouts a word. Given that she crops back up in Jaime's only chapter in Dance, it seems quite likely that she chose to bring the Kingslayer to Lady Stoneheart, doing so by shouting the word sword, much as she does in this dream. This is the main detail that really seals it to me that there is some form of otherworldly knowledge in this dream, as it runs directly parallel to the, I would say, most important event in Brienne's story throughout A Feast for Crows, which Jaime has no way of knowing about as of the current story. It's also important to discuss the Kingsguard. They mostly seem to serve as a representation of Jaime's past and his trauma, however, there are some strange occurrences there as well. Arthur Dane is quoted as follows: "We all swore oaths," said Arthur Dane, so sadly. This is a pretty exact mirror to what we saw him say to Ned at the Tower of Joy via flashbacks in the first book. This is quite notable as Jaime wasn't present for this event, as he was half a continent away in King's Landing, further lending to the idea that he's tapped into some hub of larger consciousness, and one that could be potentially tapped into by other characters in the near future. The final part of this specific dream to discuss is the presence of the others. The dead play a massive role in this sequence, as does the idea of a flaming sword. This has caused many people to associate Jaime and or Brienne with being Azor Ahai, as in this vision they seem to be the final fiery swords standing against the tide of bone. Specifically, Jaime's sword extinguishes when he allows the horrors of his past to consume him, which makes me think this is a warning of sorts against what Jaime must not do in an eventual fight against the White Walkers. There's a lot of evidence that many different characters could be Azor Ahai, and this dream is one element of many that tosses Jaime's hat into the proverbial prophetic ring. The second dream takes place in Jaime's final chapter in A Feast for Crows. It's a bit shorter, so I am going to read it verbatim, and I think there's a lot of interesting things to discuss and analyze within this specific passage that I'll get into after the passage has concluded. That night he dreamt he was back in the great sept of Baelor, still standing vigil over his father's corpse. The sept was still and dark until a woman emerged from the shadows and walked slowly to the bier. "Sister," he said, but it was not Cersei. She was all in gray, a silent sister. A hood and veil concealed her features, but he could see the candles burning in the green pools of her eyes. "Sister," he said, "what would you have of me?" His last word echoed up and down the sept. Me, 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 me. "I am not your sister, Jaime." She raised a pale, soft hand and pushed her hood back. "Have you forgotten me?" "Can I forget someone I never knew?" The words caught in his throat. He did know her, but it had been so long. "Will you forget your own Lord Father, too? I wonder if you ever knew him, truly." Her eyes were green, her hair spun gold. He could not tell how old she was. 15, he thought, or 50. She climbed the steps to stand above the bier. He could never abide being laughed at. That was the thing he hated most. "Who are you?" He had to hear her say it. "The question is, who are you? This is a dream." "Is it?" She smiled sadly. "Count your hands, child. One. One hand clasped tight around the sword hilt. Only one. In my dreams, I always have two hands." He raised his right arm and stared uncomprehending at the ugliness of his stump. "We all dream of things we cannot have. Tywin dreamed that his son would be a great knight, that his daughter would be a queen. He dreamed that they would be so strong and brave and beautiful that no one would ever laugh at them. I am a knight," he told her, "and Cersei is a queen." A tear rolled down her cheek. The woman raised her hood again and turned back on him. Jaime called after her, but already she was moving away, her skirt whispering lullabies as it brushed across the floor. "Don't leave me," he wanted to call, but of course she had left them long ago. He woke in darkness, shivering. The room had grown cold as ice. Despite the fact that in Born to Run, Bruce Springsteen thinks dreams and visions are the same thing in one lyric, I don't think that's the case in A Song of Ice and Fire. Specifically, when talking about the two instances of dreams, as I've called them earlier in this video, with Jaime Lannister, I think they are different things. The first one is just that it's a dream, it is not something that is intentionally being given to Jaime. He is sleeping atop a Weirwood, and it is giving him these unconscious magical thoughts that perhaps pertain to him in some way through his subconscious, but overall aren't being intentionally sent to him by anyone. Whereas in this vision that we've just gone over, he specifically remarks on the fact that he only has one hand, and in his dreams, he typically has two hands. This doesn't seem to be a dream. This is what I would call a vision. This is being sent to Jaime by someone for some purpose, for some reason that is, as of yet, unremarked upon in any other instance in the story, as it is pretty late in the story as it currently goes. Specifically, it seems as though someone is trying to communicate something to Jaime through this vision sequence in his last chapter in Feast, standing vigil over his father and meeting with this mysterious figure. Who is this mysterious figure? It's quite obvious given the fact that he says it very closely resembles Cersei. This seems to be his mother, Joanna Lannister. This would make sense given that it's a face that he claims to have maybe forgotten, given the fact that it's been so long since he ever saw his mother. But it seems as though he would never truly forget that face, as he does seem to have that memory of her and seems to come to grips with it as the vision goes further. What's more, this vision has some interesting parallels to other figures in the story. The Silent Sister kind of parallels Cersei's current problems in Feast that she's going through. At the same time, this vision is happening as she's imprisoned by the Faith. And additionally, the idea of this being a hooded, silent, being the operative word, sister, there is some comparison to Catelyn Stark, both wearing gray robes and both being important figures in Jaime's psyche and in the future of Jaime's story. That being said, it doesn't seem like it would be Catelyn who is sending this vision, as she doesn't seem to have any such power in the story so far. It could just be some element of the story that Martin is using as a parallel in that specific instance. In terms of who might be sending this second vision to Jaime, there are two main candidates in my eyes. The first of these is Quaithe. There isn't as much explicit evidence for Quaithe as there is for the other one, which I'm going to get to, but she is the only woman in our story we've seen have the ability to send dreams to people, as she does this to Daenerys throughout books 3 and 5 in the series. Additionally, we see that she could be kind of playing the game similarly to how Bloodraven seems to be, as Bloodraven sends visions to at least Bran, probably more people, and she might be trying to do other things as well, as Quaithe could be Shiera Seastar. That's what I typically think that Quaithe is, but overall, there isn't a ton of evidence for it being Quaithe, other than both kind of main figures in this vision being a woman. The main candidate who I think could have sent this vision to Jaime Lannister is the Three-Eyed Crow. People believe that Three-Eyed Crow could be Brendan Rivers, could be a future version of Bran Stark, and I myself have gone back and forth on that a couple times in the recent past. I might make a video on that in the near future, but the main thing that sells me on the fact that this is the source of Jaime's vision is a distinct parallel to Bran's first vision in his third chapter in A Game of Thrones. To quote from that, immediately after Bran has been thrown from the tower by Jaime himself, he begins receiving these magical visions that end up setting him on the quest that he is still following in the story. To quote from that chapter, Bran 3, A Game of Thrones, "Are you really a crow?" Bran asked. "Are you really falling?" the crow asked back. "It's just a dream," Bran said. "Is it?" asked the crow. And then to compare that to Jamie 7, A Feast for Crows. "Who are you?" He had to hear her say it. "The question is, who are you?" "This is a dream." "Is it?" She smiled sadly. "Count your hands, child." The back and forth of this conversation is pretty much one to one between a dreamer, being Bran or Jaime, and whatever entity seems to be sending them their dreams. This could be the same person doing it, or if Quaithe is Shiera Seastar and Bloodraven is the Three-Eyed Crow, it could be a parallel between the two of them. However, overall, I do like the interpretation that this vision is being sent by a future version of Bran back to Jaime to influence him somehow. But how exactly does Bran want to influence Jaime in this vision? I don't think it's quite clear here, but I think it's very much sowing the seeds for something in the future. He's kind of priming the ground, getting Jaime ready to receive some other prophetic vision in the future, as there isn't really much actionable in this specific vision, but it is kind of painting the direction Bran wants Jaime to go. He seems to want Jaime to branch out from his father's ideas of himself, and it almost seems to be counteracting the dream that he had previously received from the Weirwoods and from sleeping on that stump. Overall, it is a really interesting combination of dreams, as it is a very kind of mixed signals between the two. Albeit they both seem to be driving Jamie towards a very specific end game, and that is one that is very involved in the overall destiny of the world and the plot with the White Walkers, which I hope he's very involved in, because that would be a lot better than what ended up happening in the show. So, what do you think of these two dream sequences? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if there are any other dream sequences you want me to cover. I'd love to do more of them because, as I said at the top, they are super, super fun to cover. I really enjoyed making this video. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it as well. Really helps me grow the channel and just generally helps me feel good about doing all this, and that just helps everything. So, yeah, I really appreciate you watching and sticking around to the end, and I will be back with more videos in the near future. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a good one. I'll see you soon.